When you hear the phrase fighting game, what do you think of? Chances are you think of whatever your favorite game in said genre may be. Some people might think Guilty Gear, others might think KOF. However, I think it'd be hard to dispute the fact that the number one game that comes to mind would be Street Fighter. And of course, this is for good reason. Street Fighter was the first real fighting game series. I mean, sure, there had been attempts, but Street Fighter 2 was the very first polished, competitive fighting game in the world, and single-handedly kickstarted a golden era of fighting games, the likes of which the world had never seen. And it's not like Street Fighter was a one-hit wonder or anything, far from it. The Street Fighter franchise continues to be the most popular and well-known fighting game franchise in the world, even 30-odd years after its initial claim to fame. And in today's day and age, where competition among fighting game companies is tighter than ever, Street Fighter continues to be the most played fighting game overall. So that raises the question, what is it that Street Fighter does that makes it unique? In the last episode of Design Excellence, I discussed how Guilty Gear's character design and systems allow for constant, in-depth, moment-to-moment decision-making, and how exhilarating that can feel. I got quite a bit of criticism on that episode, saying that I was praising Guilty Gear too much and ignoring the strengths of other fighting games. To which I respond, yeah? This is a series about good game design, and that was the Guilty Gear episode. Of course I'm gonna talk about Guilty Gear in the Guilty Gear episode. People seem to get the idea that because I praised Guilty Gear for some of its design, that meant no other game does that same thing well, which is not true at all. If I interrupted myself every sentence explaining how every other fighting game does something well too, we'd be here for a little longer than I'm willing to script. Also, for the bulk of this video discussion, I'm going to be using Street Fighter V footage, but most of the stuff I talk about will apply to Street Fighter 4, 3, and 2 as well. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. To a new player looking in, it might look as if Street Fighter is restrictive in its mechanics, and while that's sort of true at a base level, there's a much bigger picture that needs to be painted. Ever since Street Fighter 2 in 1992, Capcom has always used the philosophy of less equals more in their design for Street Fighter. Basically, the idea behind less equals more in this context is that by giving the player less options in any given situation, they'll have to think more carefully about the options they do have. In order to pull this concept off, each option needs to be balanced perfectly in order to ensure that one option doesn't become so strong that its benefits outweigh its risks, and Street Fighter exemplifies this perfectly. The most rewarding offensive option in Street Fighter would without a doubt be the forward jump, but if you've ever played in the lower ranks of Street Fighter V, you'll know that a forward jump's powerful benefits come with an equally weak drawback. Jumps in Street Fighter are intentionally restrictive. If you input a forward jump, you are locked into your respective jump arc, and must fully complete said jump in order to be able to make another decision. This means that jumping brings a massive risk, as anyone ready for a jump-in can easily anti-air for a large chunk of damage. So, if you want to forward jump and gain the reward of a high damage combo starter, you need to be prepared to take the risk of an anti-air. This general idea can be seen in pretty much every single one of Street Fighter's fundamental options. If you want to control neutral with a fireball, don't be too predictable or the opponent will get a free jump-in. If you want to shimmy and control footsies, don't become too predictable or the opponent will sweep. If you want to sweep and stop a shimmy, don't do so half-heartedly or the opponent can crouch block and punish with a sweep if they're up. Now, all of this may make it sound like all of the choices in Street Fighter are far too threatening to be worthwhile. Why risk my health on a jump-in when I can just block in the corner until mommy comes to pick me up from preschool? If the enemy can just wait and punish me for everything, how can I possibly get anything done? The answer is conditioning. You see, by restricting the physical options you are provided with at any given moment, Street Fighter opens up an insane level of mental options. Case in point, conditioning. Before we discuss this subject, I'm going to quickly define a term for you to better support my explanation. That term is mental stack. Mental stack in a fighting game is a representation of the decision fatigue found in any given round. Basically, the more times you are asked to make a decision, the harder it becomes to do so, and so oftentimes your brain will ignore certain parts of a scenario to make it easier. For example, after the fourth Falc player in a row, I'm not thinking about how I just dashed forward full screen and made an extremely predictable jump. I'm thinking about how I don't want to let this character keep me out with air fireballs any longer, and how dumb her visual design is. This is where conditioning comes into play. By forcing your opponent to repeatedly make choices, you are conditioning them to, in the future, make the choices you want. For an example of conditioning, let's look at this match between me and a Ken player. In the Ken vs. Gill matchup, generally I want to be able to keep Ken at a distance and enforce my strong neutral play with Gill's long-range buttons, fireball, and parry. Whenever this Ken decides to throw a fireball, I notice he tends to run behind it and use it to cover his approach. To counteract this, I parry the fireball as early as possible and throw a fireball of my own right after, stuffing his approach and forcing him to make another decision. 2 or 3 times he tries this again to the same result. In this very moment, while it may not be obvious, I am conditioning this Ken player. His approach option of a run behind fireball keeps getting stuffed by opposing fireballs, so he is less likely to run behind fireball again, and more likely to jump to hopefully catch me in my counter fireball. Next time he throws a fireball, he dashes a short distance and jumps. Bingo. I was ready for this exact scenario and chose not to throw the fireball in the event of a jump-in, and he played exactly into my hand. I anti-air and get a massive combo as a reward for excellent conditioning. This type of scenario is found in every single aspect of Street Fighter, and leads perfectly into my next topic, which is Street Fighter's willingness to diversify their risk-reward balance. If every character in Street Fighter wanted the exact same thing in each scenario, these kinds of conditioning wouldn't work anymore because you could always run the same game plan no matter who you're up against. That's why Street Fighter uses its character design to bend and distort the risk-reward balance, resulting in each character matchup having a completely different set of goals for each player. For example, Street Fighter V's Vega is a character whose long range and speedy buttons allow him to dominate on the ground, but his anti-air game is somewhat lacking. He can still anti-air a jump with his unique air throw or crouching fierce, but in the Vega matchup, usually jump-ins have a higher reward than risk, whereas fighting him on the ground has higher risk than reward. Vega can then use this to condition his opponent, because if Vega stops throwing out long-range normals, he is free to anti-air with that air grab, sending the opponent right back to the ground in order to make the same decision again. Compare this to a character like Gill, who plays a fairly solid neutral game due to his far normals and different fireball options, but gets his most damage out of his anti-air combos. Gill and Vega both play a strong mid-range game, but Vega and Gill's end goal for their neutral couldn't be more different. You see, Vega wants to force the opponent to fight him in neutral by jabbing with fast yet long-reaching claw normals, but he must be careful of the jump-in to enforce this. For Vega, the goal is the neutral and the obstacle is the jump-in. For Gill, he wants to control neutral in a way that forces the opponent to jump, and then use his absurdly high anti-air combo damage in order to score the life lead and force the opponent back into the same scenario. The issue with this is that Gill's neutral buttons, while long-reaching, have enough recovery that they can be punished from a jump-in. So Gill must condition the opponent to jump when he wants them to, because if they jump at an unexpected time, he loses the interaction. As I previously stated, for Vega, the goal is the neutral, and the obstacle is the jump-in. For Gill, the jump-in is the goal, and the obstacle is the neutral. 2 completely opposite rewards for 2 extremely similar fundamental games. Because of this willingness to diversify, Street Fighter allows itself to design characters that apply basic sets of tools in completely different ways, just by providing said characters a difference in their risk-reward scenarios. Which leads me into my third topic, Street Fighter's willingness to use this risk-reward balance to diversify each character's effective range. In the last episode, I gave an example of something that Guilty Gear does well that Street Fighter does not, so I feel it's only fair that I do the opposite for this video. You see, Guilty Gear's game design is heavily focused on offense. Knock down this, Oki that, IAD this, super jump that. However, by putting such a heavy focus on offense and just the system mechanics alone, Guilty Gear restricts most of its characters to one effective range, that being right in your face. While it's true that some characters handle neutral better than others, generally speaking, in Guilty Gear, the goal is to approach your opponent, not keep them out. This creates a sort of hazy space in their character design, where their zoning-oriented characters only zone you out so they can rush you down, and their neutral-based characters only want to win neutral so they can have their turn to rush you down. Street Fighter does not restrict itself in such a way. In part because of Street Fighter's less equals more philosophy, and in part because of Street Fighter's emphasis on conditioning, The game does an excellent job of letting its characters play and respond to scenarios in completely different ways from other characters. For example, a character like Rashid plays a game similar to Guilty Gear, where he uses his speedy movement options and strong buttons to pressure you into disadvantage, where he runs it to mix you up. However, a character like Dhalsim doesn't have anything to do with this sort of game plan. Now sure, Dhalsim can mix up very effectively in Street Fighter V using his Fireball and last second teleport combined with his instant overhead options, but the key difference here is that Dhalsim does all this from a range. Put Rashid and Dhalsim standing next to each other, and Rashid wins by a long shot. Put Dhalsim standing full screen from Rashid, and Dhalsim frustrates Rashid with his pokes extremely efficiently. This is even more noteworthy when you look at how different characters respond to generally positive scenarios. For example, scoring a knockdown in any fighting game is always a key goal because it lets you set up for a mix-up, and allows you to continue doing whatever it is your character does best. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that Dhalsim won't take Oki, far from it. However, Dhalsim responds to this knockdown scenario in a similar, yet very different way. Almost exactly like the Vega-Gill comparison I made earlier. Rashid is a very straightforward character when it comes to this scenario. He waits for you to get back up, then he mixes you up to hopefully score a knockdown again, then he runs back up and does it again. However, Dhalsim wants to use his mix-ups and Oki options as an opportunity to escape back to his effective range. Notice that both characters follow the trend of Oki to returning to their effective range, but Rashid stays up close and Dhalsim goes back far away. Another thing of note is that in Street Fighter V specifically, Dhalsim follows the pattern in an even more unique way. You see, Street Fighter V focuses mostly on offense, and Dhalsim is surprisingly no different. Dhalsim's teleport special move allows him to pose the threat of a cross-up overhead or low from anywhere on the screen. The thing is, Dhalsim needs time to set these scenarios up. If Dhalsim were to press teleport at mid to close range, he would either get hit right as he's teleporting, or right after he finishes, leaving it as a suboptimal option for up-close offense, allowing players to draw a pretty clear conclusion that this character doesn't run offense up close. If Dhalsim is able to keep you at bay from 3/4 to full screen, however, he can set up his Yoga Flame projectile to keep the opponent blocking as he teleports, mixes up, then teleports back to safety. In this scenario, it is very clear that Dhalsim is still running offensive pressure, keeping in line with Street Fighter V's design principles. However, Dhalsim is unique in that his offense requires for him to be at a distance to begin, still allowing him to play a unique effective range compared to characters like Rashid. Street Fighter's less equals more philosophy opens up a huge amount of depth that allows it to consistently feel refined and engaging, and everything I discussed in this video is what I believe to be the answer to the question of how Street Fighter stays on top. By having a few simplistic options carry so much depth, Street Fighter allows itself to diversify itself inside its core mechanics, making each match of Street Fighter feel like a crash course in fighting game fundamentals. As always, if you liked the video, a subscription would help out a lot, and be sure to let me know what games you'd like to see covered in the future. For now though, that's all. This has been Adventure, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.